This report comes from numerous sources, including my own memories of this particular event. You know, in my life, I have been, well, you might say, enchanted somewhat by the strange and the enigmatic. All that began around 1962 with a UFO encounter in my parents' backyard early one morning in Bridgeport, Michigan. It was actually in my dad's garden. The UFO event I am going to share with you today is one which still haunts me, in that I will always wonder who or what was at the controls. It was October 30th, 1975, All Hallows Eve, and I was in the 11th grade. As I recall, that night was really quite chilly. My dad had a radio he let me use that picked up the standard AM/FM bands, but also shortwave. As I laid there in bed, alone in my upstairs bedroom, I tuned in a radio station of the famous War of the Worlds 1938 broadcast by Orson Welles, and the one that panicked the nation that very night, except 37 years prior. For some reason, I had a difficult time sleeping that night, and what always made that worse was that damned cuckoo clock downstairs that let me know every 15 minutes that I was still awake. Anyway, I began fiddling around with the radio dial and different bands. I don't recall exactly what time it was, but I'm thinking after 11 o'clock news, as Dad and Mom had already gone to bed. I had the dial almost as far left as it would go, though I don't recall the band. I began hearing chatter between the Wurtsmith Air Force Base and a pilot out over Lake Huron. Wurtsmith was just across Manhattan Lake from my parents' home, maybe about a mile at the most from the main gate as the crow flies over the lake. The pilot was conversing about an unknown they were following, an unknown out over Lake Huron, and I don't remember any of the conversation except that, but I listened till they got down by Saginaw Bay when the unidentified object vanished. I'll get into more detail in a moment, but just a little more background. Wurtsmith was the home for the 379th Bombardment Wing, which controlled the 524th Bombardment Squadron and the 920th Aerial Refueling Squadron. Wurtsmith was one of the northern tier bases that housed nuclear weapons. I'll be going back and forth a bit using several reports. This first is from an amazing book titled Clear Intent by Lawrence Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. According to the book, about 10:10 p.m., personnel in the vicinity of the family housing area located in the southern portion of the air base reported what appeared to be running lights of a low aircraft which was thought to be a helicopter. The craft hovered up and down in an erratic manner. Airman Martin E. Tackaby was assigned to the Capehart housing area gate, and he said that he saw the object for about 5 seconds near the perimeter of Wurtsmith, due south of his location. And Tackaberry reported that the object had one white light pointing directly downward and two red lights near the rear. Near the base main gate, Airman Michael J. Myers, who was assigned to the Police Unit 7, was on duty at the base motor pool. And Myers looked west, and he could see several lights near the western edge of the base. The lights turned north and appeared to lose altitude, and he heard no sound. Security police at the weapons storage area notified Colonel John J. Doran, Vice Commander's 379th Bomb Wing, that the guard located at the back gate had reported what he thought to be a helicopter overhead, and the command post notified Colonel Broadman, who was wing commander, and Colonel Doran, and they proceeded to the flight line. It was at this time that radar approach tracked the craft for about 35 miles on a southeastern bearing from Wurtsmith. At the same time, a KC-135 tanker was returning from a refueling mission. It entered Wurtsmith's traffic pattern and obtained permission to fly transition approaches, and Colonel Broadman ordered the KC-135 to attempt to identify the object. Aboard the KC-135 were Major Frederick Pappas, the plane's commander, Captain K.E. May, co-pilot, Captain Rick Meyer, the navigator, Captain Myron Taylor, instructor navigator, Captain Randy Higginbotham, instructor pilot, and Sergeant Steve Smith. Now I want to quote from the statement about that KC-135 encounter with the UFO, and it was given to the 379th Bomb Wing Historian Staff Sergeant Paul J. Cahill by Captain Taylor in a memo for the record dated January 18, 1979, considerably after the event. But it was reported, and I quote, "We were returning from a refueling mission, and during our first approach into the traffic pattern, RAPCON vectored us to check out a reported UFO in the area of Wurtsmith weapons storage area. And as I recall, this activity occurred between 10:30 and 11 o'clock in the evening around the 1st of November. I remember seeing lights similar to strobe lights, which were flashing irregularly. We followed the lights north, out over Lake Huron. At first, it was difficult to determine whether there were two different objects because of the irregular flashing of the lights, but after observing the lights, we determined that there were in fact two objects, and the irregular flashing appeared to be some sort of signal being passed from one to the other in an effort to maintain the same position. We were able to paint an object on the radar scope for about 10 seconds. I would estimate that our altitude was about 2,000 feet and our speed approximately 200 knots. Shortly after turning south in pursuit of the UFO, we called approach control and received blanket clearance to follow the UFO at all altitudes and at all vectors. Occasionally, RAPCON would pick up the UFO and help by giving us vectors to the UFO's position. I would guess that we stayed close to the UFO most of the time, approximately 1 mile away, and each time we attempted to close on the object, it would speed away from us. We followed the UFO down to Saginaw Bay and started to cross the bay when we lost it because of all the fishing boat lights. At first, we thought it had landed on one of the large oil tankers, but later decided that we had been wrong. We continued to search the bay area, but we didn't see it, so we changed our heading for Wurtsmith. On the way back, we picked the UFO up again at our 8 o'clock position. We turned away and it proceeded to follow us. Finally, we turned back in the direction of the UFO, and it really took off back in the direction of the bay area. I know this might sound crazy, but I would estimate that the UFO sped away from us, doing approximately 1,000 knots. We continued in the direction of the bay until RAPCON called us again and said they were painting a UFO 4 to 5 miles over the coast, traveling in a westerly direction. They vectored us to the position of the UFO, and we, while on final approach, and we proceeded, but at that point we were low on fuel and were forced to return to Wurtsmith Air Force Base. I remember that while on final approach, we saw the lights again near the weapons storage area. Following the mission, we discussed the incident, and about a week later, Captain Higginbotham was questioned by the OSI and cautioned not to discuss the incident. And that was, I mean, you have to say, a rather dramatic event, with an object speeding away at the phenomenal 1,000 knots. Well, but it pales by comparison to the following by GAREL W. White, retired U.S. Air Force, and was last known living in the Seattle area. The following is a direct quote from his account, and a fascinating account it is indeed, and I quote, "My name is GAREL W. White, retired U.S. Air Force, now living in the Seattle area. I don't know if you will get this response, but over the years it has become more clear than confusing about the nature of the Wurtsmith UFO incident of October 1975. Reading about the incident in early years suggested I was not telling the truth until I now read that 2 UFOs were in the area and split up while being chased by a KC-135 tanker. One shot towards Saginaw, and the other found its way over to our Cape Heart Gate housing area and motor pool and munitions storage." GAREL W. White, Sergeant, stationed at the main gate, Wurtsmith Air Force Base, approximately 10-20 hours, almost half hour of initially being posted there for the midnight shift. I never really noticed the extra activity over the radio because I was busy controlling the small rush of vehicles entering the installation, and which was normal for that time. I got a call on the hot phone from command post and answered it. The command post asked me if I saw anything over the Lake Huron, just like that, and I looked and I saw a bright white light that looked similar to the planet Venus low in the sky. I reported that to the command post, and they told me to keep an eye on it, and they could give me no more information when I asked what was up. I thought nothing of that and continued to my duty with oncoming traffic entering the base. Approximately 10 minutes later, the hot phone rang again. This time, I glanced up and noticed it was not the planet Venus low in the sky. It was larger and appeared to be coming toward landfall of the Michigan shoreline. I watched it for about a few more minutes as the traffic coming on base died down and I could pay more attention to it. And I noticed another security police vehicle approach my squadron commander, a major. I can't remember his name, but I can get it. The white light was approximately 5 miles away when the major and I watched it approach. I noticed some red lights and a slight swooshing sound as it closed in and stopped almost centered over the main gate, less than 100 feet to the right of the main gate, about 150 feet in the air. It was a piercing white light, so bright you could not see behind it, around it, over it. I felt it was low enough I could pick up a rock and hit it. At this time, no traffic entered the base, and I stepped off the platform of the entry control area, walked about 100 feet from the main gate directly under the blinding white light. It stayed there for more than 5 minutes. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh in 3-second intervals was the only sound I heard. The major walked over, and we were both perplexed to what it was. We were both directly under it. This was for less than 5 minutes, and I walked back to the gate, and it began to move slowly, approximately 2 to 3 miles per hour down the roadway, direct line toward the flight line, about 2 miles away from the Christmas tree alert B-52s and alert KC tankers, 135 tankers, illuminating the roadway as it went until approximately 3 blocks away the light went out, then lots of radio traffic. I don't know where Michael Myers was, but he did stop by and compared notes with me. The major departed after the lights went out to the command post. I was told not to speak of the incident, and I didn't, until I was going to retire at Grissom Air Force Base, Indiana in 1990. I told a batch of new first-year troops of the encounter with the UFO when I was in my first 4 years of service. They said I was pulling their leg, until one of them went to his room and came back with a Time Life book on UFOs, and listed under Maelstrom Air Force Base UFO was word for word the UFO account, except it only said Capehart housing and not main gate encounter. I've sort of kept my mouth shut until 2003 when I noticed the KC-135 was chasing 2 UFOs in a story starting from Loring Air Force Base and wound up at Maelstrom Air Force Base. I saw the second one. Now I feel better about the whole incident. End quote. Again, a totally amazing event. As is usually the case with UFO sightings, this was never resolved, never have the objects been identified. Interestingly, Wurtsmith Air Force Base, it turns out, is only one piece of a disconcerting series of sightings. Over a period of about 3 weeks, in October and November of 1975, several strategic air command bases in the northern tier of states were placed on high priority alert due to repeated incursions of unidentified aircraft flying at low altitude over atomic weapons storage areas. The Commander-in-Chief of the North American Air Defense Command, known as NORAD, sent a 4-part message to NORAD units on November 11, 1975, summarizing those events. The following are excerpts from that memo. I must add, though, I edited these excerpts greatly because I didn't want to deviate too far away from the topic of this video, which was the Wurtsmith Air Force Base sightings. But anyways, from the memos, I quote, "Since October 28, 1975, numerous reports of suspicious objects have been received at the NORAD CU, reliable military personnel at Loring Air Force Base, Maine, Wurtsmith Air Force Base, Michigan, Maelstrom Air Force Base, Mount Minot, Air Force Base, North Dakota, and Canadian Forces Station, Falconbridge, Ontario, Canada, have visually sighted suspicious objects." Further on, the report states, a teletype message to the National Military Command Center in Washington, D.C. reported the aircraft definitely penetrated the Loring Air Force Base northern perimeter and was on one occasion within 300 yards of the munitions storage area perimeter. The craft began to circle in the vicinity of the nuclear weapons storage area at about 150 feet altitude. When it penetrated the nuclear weapons storage area at 300 feet altitude, it was reported to command. And at 8:45 p.m., Sergeant Grover K. Eagleston was on duty in the control tower when a call came from the command post requesting a radar track on the mysterious craft. And for about 40 minutes, he observed the object on radar circling around and then abruptly vanished from the screen as if it had either landed or dropped below the minimum level of radar coverage. End quote. Sergeant Stephen Eichner, a B-52 crew chief, and other crew members spotted an unidentified object, red and orange in color, over the flight line, and said it looked to be in the shape of a stretched out football, somewhat cigar shape. When the object stopped and hovered, Eichner and the other men jumped into a truck and drove toward the object, and as they turned onto the road that led to the weapons storage area, they encountered the object at about 300 feet ahead and hovering about 5 feet off the ground. Its length appeared to be equivalent to about 4 car lengths. Sergeant Eicher said that it looked like a desert scene. He said, and I quote, "You see waves of heat rising off the desert floor, and that's what I saw. There were these waves in front of me, or in front of the object, and all the colors were blending together. The object," he continued, "was solid, and we could not hear any noise coming from it." End quote. Reports from other bases were similar. At one Air Force base, where the UFO hovered near the nuclear storage, actual codes on the devices had been changed. There are no answers to the events of the fall of 1975, and they seem to be as much a mystery now as they were back then. If anybody does have answers about where these craft were from, it has not been made available. I love a good mystery, and this certainly qualifies. And knowing that it happened less than a mile from my backyard at Wurtsmith, whilst I was safely in my bed, makes me feel just a little insecure even now. Well, please check the description for my sources, where you can find even more information on the sightings at the SAC bases in 1975. Thanks for watching, and have an awesome evening.